be here. And I'm so excited to show everybody kind of what I've learned about utilities and how to use that as a value add strategy. My husband and I, we are multifamily investors, just like many of you. We were apartment operators in San Diego, but we recently just relocated to Florida. We have about 100 units in San Diego, and we have 30 units now in Pompano Beach. But, you know, just like many of you, part of being a owner operator is you recognize a lot of problems. And one day while we were seated around the kitchen table, when I was opening up my water bill, I was surprised to see that the costs were continually increasing for our water and sewer rates. And it was starting to eat into our profits. Now, we pleaded with our tenants to conserve, and with no avail, our bill just kept going up and up. So, you know, you think about like water use and how you use water. I always like to use the example of, you know, if you go to a hotel room and you have somewhere to go and your shirt's a little wrinkly, what do? You know, me, I put my shirt in the shower, I hang it up, I turn on the hot water, and you let it go. And you do it because it comes with the cost of the hotel. You know, our tenants think the exact same way. And so, you know, this really got started one day when I had a tenant call us, and that tenant was complaining of running water. When we inspected what was really going on, we discovered that the neighboring tenant was leaving her shower on while at work because her dog had anxiety and she didn't want her dog to upset the neighbors. And that's when we knew we had to do something. So, you know, we saw, you know, our utilities are our third largest expense. Our water costs, you know, we were in San Diego at the time, but our water costs really across the country have risen over 75% over the last 10 years. And you think, well, I'll just raise my rent if I'm covering that cost within my rent. But really, you can't raise your rents fast enough to cover that volatile expense and remain competitive in your market. So there are options out there. You know, the big owners, they use these companies called utility billing service companies to transfer this expense to their tenants. But those have their own problems as well. Now, this is a service company that takes your bills, subdivides it, and then bills out your tenants on your behalf. But the problem is these large service companies, and there's many of them that offer this service, if you don't have at least 1,000 units in your portfolio, they won't service you. Many of them have 1,000 unit minimums. And I don't know about you, but my 130 units, I'm going to be a ways before 1,000 units. And so, and if you look at the full multifamily supply in the US, that's 50% of the market is owned by people who have portfolios under 1,000 units. So, you know, there's lots of companies out there and they won't service you. So, you know, I don't like to take no for an answer. So my husband one day looks at me and said, well, if they're not going to service us, you know, I know that, and this is a little bit of a side story, you know, operations wasn't really my thing. Lots of issues and maintenance, and I was helping my husband with his apartments, but that wasn't my cup of tea per se. So he said, you're not that happy in management. Why don't you go get a job at one of these companies and maybe they'll take us on by default? So that's what I did. I got a job at one of the utility billing companies. That's me there. I helped grow that company from 100,000 to 20 million in 5 years. And of course, I became a customer by default. I also became an expert in utility billing. And I discovered the secret of utility billing, which I'm going to share with all of you today. And the secret behind utility billing is that it's actually not about the billing. The secret behind utility billing is it's about forced appreciation. You use this method to grow your portfolio with no cash out of pocket. And we're going to go into a little bit about what that means. This is the RUBS to Riches framework. RUBS is Ratio Utility Billing System. So this is a mechanism that helps you bill out your residence, and helps you grow your profits and helps you grow your portfolio. And so we're going to go into a little bit about what each one of these means. So first, you want to split your bills. So what can your tenants pay for? First thing you want to ask yourself is, what is an occupant dependent expense? So think of things like water, very occupant dependent. Think of things like hot water, possibly a shared heating system. Think about trash, pest control. You might be able to do cable or Wi-Fi contracts with some of the bigger providers. You might have a lot of amenities on site that you might be able to charge an amenity fee for. You might even be able to do an electric car charger at your property, or possibly some renter's insurance that you can also make additional income from. So this is looking at your expenses, saying what is occupant dependent and what can be split among the residents. When you think of other industries, when there's price compression, think of the airline industries. What do? They unbundle their baggage, right? Think about what resorts do. They unbundled a lot of their services, and now you have resort fees. This is the same way with multifamily. When there's price compression in rent, you're going to have to unbundle your rent. Think of the future of multifamily is really triple net of apartments. And how do you implement it? First, you have to have 30-day notices, a change of terms of tenancy if you have tenants within a lease. You're going to want to accompany that with tenant intro letters as well. The next number is save on number 2 here. Tenants use less of what they pay for. So just think, that same hotel concept. If you're paying for your water, you're going to shut the sink off while you're brushing your teeth. You're going to not do a load of dishes with one dish in there, or a load of laundry with one article of clothing in there. You're going to actually use less of what you're paying for because it makes you more aware and more responsible. So not only do you split the bills, but this also promotes the slight change of modification of behavior from your residents from this additional accountability. So overall, you typically see around a 20% savings across the property level when you start implementing a RUBS program. One of the things I remember my husband said, well, I'm so worried, what if all my tenants move out? And of course that didn't happen. But what we did get is we had a flurry of maintenance requests, requests for leaky faucets, a running toilet. Think of how much a flapper costs to replace under a toilet. It's almost nothing. But think of how much water is lost if a flapper is broken and your toilet's running all the time. Less frequent uses of appliances, dishwashers, clothing washers. Why this matters is because often residents don't report leaks in a timely manner because they're hiding things in their apartment. They don't want you in there to know, oh, I have a pet that's unauthorized, or maybe I have additional tenants that are unauthorized. So I don't report these things that will then cause secondary damage. So not only are you starting to bill your residents, but you're really starting to have overall behavior change from your residents, more accountability, and the ability to kind of resolve any leaks or any kind of issue that's in the apartment because you're able to get in there because the residents are reporting them. The third thing is surge. Surge is the forced appreciation of property values. And we're going to go into this a little bit later in the presentation of what those numbers look like and what you can expect. And they actually have a little bit of a calculator that will make it really easy for you to analyze deals with. I call this NOI hacking. This is to increase your NOI, is to force the appreciation of your property by generating additional income streams. So this could be, maybe you have a cable contract or a laundry contract or a Wi-Fi contract that you can get additional income from. Often you can get additional income even from requiring your residents to have tenant insurance, where these insurance companies will give you $10 or $15 on top of the insurance policy that's income for the landlord by you promoting or requiring this at the property level. Also by reducing operating expenses or a combination of the both. And why this matters is because the NOI savings that you see divided by your cap rate equals the property value increase. Because these are commercial properties, that's how the properties are valued. It's your NOI divided by your cap rate. Awesome. The last one is scale. So refinance and repeat. So once you've increased your property values by increasing your NOI, you can access that capital to scale. Increased property values provide you the capital to grow your portfolio. Repeating this method, property over property, helps you scale your portfolio. And there's many financial products available. There's refinance products, and there's also lines of credits where you can get a line of credit against your property or a portfolio of properties rather than maybe doing anything with your loan and using that line of credit so you're not affecting your equity within those properties to buy other properties. And then once you get that next property, increase as well, then you can pay off that line of credit as well. Why this matters is because borrowed money is tax-free versus capital gains and versus 1031 time constraints when you do a 1031 exchange. We just did a 1031 exchange, and those time constraints are definitely stressful. So let's look at how this is impacted on the property financials. And actually, this is one of my properties in San Diego. And this was actually a while back because it's gone up even more in value since. But let's look at the properties, 36 units before RUBS. We have a total income of $571,000, a total expense of $249,000, and an NOI of $321,000. With a 4.5% cap rate, that's a property value of 7.1. Once we implemented this system towards our residents, we saw about $36,000 of additional income that following year. Not only did we see that $36,000 of additional income, we also saw the property expenses decrease by $7,500. So our NOI increase on that property was $43,000 annually. And that divided by the cap rate increased our property by $1 million. So just think about that. $43,000 of additional income, which was basically our water, sewer, trash, and pest control, cost us no money out of pocket to implement and increased our property value by $1 million. That was the biggest light bulb moment when I was working for this utility billing company was, wow, we can increase our property value by $1 million. What does this look like across our portfolio? And why wouldn't anybody help us before? Us little guys need just as much help as the big guys do. And they're using this to grow their portfolios. But, we don't have that option because these kind of billing companies won't service the small guys. And so we're really at a disadvantage. But get out your calculators. Let's do this on how much value is in your portfolio. And so this is a really, really easy kind of back of the envelope calculation for you to remember. And then we'll look at why you can do it this way, but then to always do the financial model as well when you're actually doing due diligence on a property. But, kind of quick and dirty, take your number of units you have in your portfolio that you're not doing this on today and times that by 1,000. So in this example is 36 units times 1,000, or actually I did this across our portfolio. So 100 units times 1,000 is $100,000 of additional revenue that we were able to take from owner paid to tenant paid. Now divide that by your cap rate. We created $2.5 million in forced depreciation, which we were able to leverage that additional capital, pull the money out, and buy another property. I mean, imagine what you can do with that amount of money to be able to buy and grow your portfolio if you're not doing this today.
That's incredible.
So how to use this when you're evaluating new deals. And so I actually just looked at a deal today that we did this on, and you have to kind of dig into the numbers here. So I'm going to hopefully you can see this on your screen, but this was a deal actually in San Diego near one of my properties in El Cajon. And these are what the property's financials look like when they're on this offering memorandum. So what they're telling us in here, if you can look under the current versus pro forma, for one, this total return is 2.6. I mean, I don't know anybody who's buying at 2.6% cap rate at this point. But especially with interest rates. But, you know, you look at this and say, is this a good deal? Now, if you look at this when it comes through in your inbox, you may see the 2.6% cap rate and immediately blow it off. But we're going to dig in and see what this really looks like. So when I look through the income line items here, I don't see anything in the income line items, even in the pro forma, that shows anything about utilities. But when I come down here to expenses, I look at water and trash and I see $40,000 in expenses. I also see gardener and pest control, $10,000. And I also see sewer, $15,000. So that's a lot of money when you're looking at these expenses. So, but always do the math with the financials. So this was 20 units. So if I do this quick model, you know, it's the property value here, 6.391. The quick model says 20 units times 1,000, $20,000 divided by the cap rate on here, 2.63% cap rate. That's $760,000 in forced depreciation. But when you really dig in, and that's, you know, outside the quick and dirty, and you start looking at this 40,000, the pest control, I took 5,000 out of the 10,000 here, and then 15,000, that comes to 60,000. I times that by 90%. So you're going to have some of that water and sewer and trash for common areas. So let's say 90% of that bill comes out to $54,000 divided by their cap rate. That is actually over $2 million in forced depreciation. So this is a good example where you could do the quick and dirty and see, hey, I'm getting close to $1 million in forced depreciation. But when you really look at the model, you want to take about 90% of those utility expenses that you know are occupant dependent. Remember, we talked about that earlier. What's an occupant dependent expense? Divide that expense, the 90% of that expense, by the cap rate. And that's where you see the real magic. $2 million of forced depreciation. Now that property's looking a little bit better than it was before. So another thing you need to ask yourself, I get this question all the time. Well, I cover this in my rent. And my question back to people who tell me that is, well, are your rents at market rate? And a lot of times they say, yeah, my rents are at market rate. And in this example, same example, my market rate rent in here is $1,320 and the comps in my neighborhood are $1,320. So I may feel like I'm at market rate, but when you really dig in a little bit more, mine is including utilities and my comps are not including utilities. So if you look at the average per unit utilities is around $82, my effective rent is really $1,238. My comps effective rent is really $1,400. So the difference between our, two properties, they're getting $165 more per unit per month when I feel like I'm at market rate. Like that's too big of a spread times 36 units. Yeah. That's too big of a spread. So when you think you're at market rate, you have to really dig in. If you're including your utilities and your neighbors are not, you would have to have 1,320 plus the 82, right? So to be at market rate, you would have to be at 1,402. But you think if you're offering 1,402 to be at market rate and your neighbor's offering 1,320, you think you're going to get any traffic coming to your door? This is the whole concept of the unbundling, right? So you have to unbundle to compete with the market rate rent, because it used to be, what amenities do you have? That was the driver for a long time. Mm-hmm. What are your amenities? But now it really comes down, well, what's your price? What's your rental price? And so if you have to, play in this commoditized space where there's pricing pressures, the only way that you can kind of protect your income is to unbundle, and unbundle those utilities is the easiest and cheapest way to do it. Here's another case study. This is another question that we get all the time. My husband had the same question. So I use Gary, a growth-focused apartment investor in Seattle with a 500 unit multifamily portfolio. Gary's considering implementing RUBS, but worried about potential resident turnover. He needs to maintain good relations with his bank and keeping occupancy high for lender compliance. Gary reviewed the local utility billing companies, but found high resident complaints and costly fees. Some companies refused to work with him due to his small size and required him to wait up to 3 months for a reimbursement. He's currently analyzing his options. So in scenario 1, we're looking at worst case scenario, and hopefully you can see this in this example. But worst case scenario, let's say we lost 3% of our tenants, and let's say those units stayed vacant for 6 months. Now, we all know that's highly unlikely, but let's just look at this worst case scenario. So you take 500 times 3%, that's 15 units, times 1320 times 6 months, that's $118,000 of lost rent. Now let's compare that risk versus reward. Our monthly RUBS income of 36,000 times 6 months is 219,000 of income you'll create by implementing the program. The revenue impact of 219 minus your lost rent of 6 months of 3% of your tenants moving out still has a positive effect on revenue by $100,000.
Wow.
Scenario 2 is, how could this change his portfolio value? And could he leverage the additional equity to grow even larger? Because remember, he's growth focused. So we took his 500 unit portfolio, which was worth $92 million. He has a total income of $8 million with a total expense of 5.3. His NOI is 2.7 with his 3% cap rate. After RUBS, he saw an increase of his income from utilities by $439,000, which is the 36,000 annualized, with a reduction in use by $97,000. His total difference of NOI increase was over $500,000. When you take that and divided it by his cap rate, he increased his portfolio value by $17 million.
Wow.
This is insane,
Wow.
right? It's,
Yep.
he's ready to go, and he wished he could do it himself to ensure his residents were taken care of, but no one will service him. And he was just wondering if only there was a better way to do it. So imagine just, no money out of pocket, increasing your portfolio value by almost $18 million. Insane.
Yeah, it is.
But small owners are underserved. But small owners face technology gap, but they're overlooked by prop tech companies. Despite being the largest segment of the market, they're denied access to these technologies that could boost their NOIs. But however, the situation is changing. And you can look at this pie chart here. We're looking at just the under 100 unit, segment here is 29%. But really the under 3,000 unit segment is another 19%. This is almost 50% of the US supply is completely underserved when it comes to utility billing just because of their size. That's where Utility Ranger comes in. So my husband and I, we started Utility Ranger in 2020 to help apartment owners bill boldly and prosper. So apartment owners face commoditization of rental rates. They lack service-oriented solutions for small customers. And Utility Ranger is a symbol of strength, guiding customers through growth challenges while making it fun and simple. It gives apartment owners the tools to navigate challenges themselves. In 2021, we received a major investment. 10X Incubator acquired half of our company, founded by Grant Cardone and Jared Yellen. And so that was one of the most exciting days of our lives, is being partnered with the 10X team.
Nice.
And how does it work? It's a billing software that allows you to bill your tenants for utilities yourself. You set up your properties to allocate the expenses proportionately to each resident. You add billing fees for additional revenue, and you can adjust resident billing calculations right within the software. You can email resident invoices that have a payment link attached for both rent and utilities. Want to get started for billing your residents for utilities? Start increasing your profits today without having to invest thousands of dollars that you don't have into your properties. And for all the buy it, rent it, profit members, we're offering a bonus of lease template. So we'll help you with a sample lease terms, a sample 30-day notice to get started, along with a sample tenant introductory letter. What's really important when you're introducing a program like this at your property, you really market it to your residents as a conservation program. You know, all residents want to conserve, and you really say, you know, we're all doing our part to conserve. We're going to be doing this to lower the overall property's utilities, and, you know, everyone's going to play a role and do their part. And marketing in that way really helps get their tenant buy-in on transferring their utility bills. No tenant wants to necessarily pay another bill, but as long as you're saying, you know, you're doing this at the end of your lease terms, or you buy a building and you say, I'm going to implement this right away, it's a really good way to introduce this kind of program to your residents. And, you know, most of the large players have been doing this for many years. And so most people think, oh, well, if I do this, I don't want to be the first one in my neighborhood to do it. But I definitely don't want to be the last person in my neighborhood to do it.
For sure.
So, you know, the big guys are doing it. So if your tenants are saying, oh, I'm going to leave because, you know, someone down the street's not doing it, it's probably highly likely that someone down the street is doing it, because over 50% of owners are doing this today. So picture a day when you happily open your big water bill, knowing your residents are going to pay you back. Picture a day when your accountant comes to you and says, wow, what are you doing differently this year? Profits are up. And picture a day when your extra profits catapult you to the next level.
Awesome.
As an added bonus, we're actually adding a free property compliance assessment, which is a $250 value. We're also offering a free concierge onboarding, which is another $300 value to all buy it, rent it, profit members. So we'll get lease templates to everybody, and compliance assessment, and free concierge onboarding.
Awesome.
So whether you're a beginning investor, you're just getting started in apartments and want to get it right the first time, or you're an intermediate investor and you've been doing this for a little while, but you know you're leaving money on the table, or you're an experienced investor and have several properties but want to increase your profits anymore, Utility Ranger can help you. So you deserve to have the same opportunities to grow the big guys have had for years. You deserve to have more money coming in than going out. And you deserve to build boldly and prosper.
Oh my gosh, awesome. Tiffany, this is awesome. And I didn't realize that you did pest control or landscape or anything else. You think utilities, you just think water, sewer, trash. So this was awesome.
Yeah. You actually, in a lot of the really large communities, that's why I had insurance with a question mark. A lot of the large communities are trying to figure out, how do we handle some of these sunk costs that maybe aren't resident dependent? So one of the things that you'll see some of the large guys do is they'll create something called an amenity fee. It's basically their version of a resort fee, right? It's how can I unbundle this even more? I mean, in Florida, you're seeing insurance rates going up $2,500 a unit per year. Imagine if you could get $50 back, or, you know, $40 back per month. I mean, that would make a big difference. You know, people are looking at Wi-Fi contracts. You know, you could bill that, and giving people access to Wi-Fi on the property. There's a lot of different things that you can do that really help you unbundle, you know, thinking of triple net, right? Triple netting of retail spaces and commercial properties. You know, really the future of multifamily is triple netting your apartments. You're renting the airspace and everything else is extra because of all these the pricing pressures and commoditizations of rents. you have to find a way to survive. And the only way to do that is to really unbundle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to leave this for some questions. And I have one question from Mark. What's the difference between submetering and RUBS? Great question. Some people ask, well, why would I use submeters versus RUBS? Well, they kind of do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Submeters have quite a bit more regulations surrounding them versus RUBS. There's very few regulations across the country regarding RUBS. But the main reason why you would choose one versus the other is submeters cost a lot of money. It's a lot of capital output, and oftentimes they fail. You have battery issues, you have equipment reading, so you have the meters and you have the meter reading equipment, and you have batteries within all these different repeaters across the properties. If any of those fail, or if any of the meters fail, it's pretty complicated to get somebody in there who knows what they're doing to change and fix all these systems. And if you look at what it does in return, if you submeter a property, what you're getting back from the residents versus doing RUBS on a property, which is a mathematical calculation, which is how many people you have in your unit versus the size of your unit. You can't just divide it equally, because you have the family of 5 in one unit and a little grandma in the next door unit. You can't divide that equally because it's not necessarily fair. But taking the number of occupants and the size makes it more fair. Yes, it's not as exact as submeters, but what you get back in return is negligible. So do I want to do the free option and do the mathematical calculation, or do I want to do the option of submeters where it's a lot of money out of pocket? Now, there are some areas that won't allow you to do RUBS. I call them, compliance hotspots. One of those areas being Miami-Dade County. For some reason, you can't do RUBS, but you can do submeters. Any new construction in California post 2018 construction requires you to have submeters on the property, which is funny because you can actually have submeters on the property, but you could still bill with RUBS. People find ways around some of these. RUBS is widely used in California, but there are a few areas that don't allow you in California to have RUBS. One of those being Santa Monica. And I think the newest one is either North or West Hollywood. I can't remember which one. But, pretty much across the country, you can do it except for a few, hotspot areas. But in those areas, that's when you would go to a submetered system. And if you do a submetered system, I highly suggest not doing that yourself because of the regulations surrounding it and the complexity of matching the provider's billing requirements. And so if you have submeters, I definitely recommend going to a service company to have them do that for you.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
Greg has a question.
Greg, what's your question?
You're taking over a building that has in-place leases
Mhm.
that say that utilities are included, water, whatever, what have you. So I'm assuming, does the 30-day notice here take precedence over the in-place lease?
Definitely not. So if somebody has an in-place lease, you're going to have those roll off. So luckily within our system, we have the ability to have a billing start date, which is different than your move-in date. So,
correct.
And no matter what you're doing, when you're doing a billing program, if you have leases in place, as those leases expire, you'll be able to start billing. So what we typically suggest is to do a blanket 30-day notice across the property. That way you don't have to remember to give a 30-day notice every time there's a lease expiring. So you give the introductory letter about the new program, promoting the conservation. You do the 30-day notice. Now, some people will have a 30-day notice if it's a month-to-month lease. Some people may have 6 months left on their lease, so they're going to have a 6-month notice, but they've already been notified with plenty of notice in advance that this is going to be coming up. So the day after their lease expires, they'll be triggered to start being billed for utilities.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
No, this was awesome. This is definitely going to be another level when we do a little underwriting to do a little extra step and see see where this
Oh,
is placed.
absolutely.
Well,
I
this,
mean,
this,
I mentioned we
sorry.
saw that property today that was 88 units. And we also noticed that there was just a huge amount of utilities not being billed. And when we looked at what that really looked like for the financials, it was like $2.5 million of additional value that could be created just by doing the utilities. So for us, when we're buying apartments, that's one of our first things that we look at. For one, we don't buy in areas that we can't do rubs. So we're buying in Florida right now, excluding
Right.
Miami-Dade, anything Howard County and north. But the first question we ask is, are they billing their tenants for utilities? And if they say no, then it goes on to the next phase of analysis, because we know we can create instant value just by changing the utility responsibility from owner paid to tenant paid. And then you look at, okay, we're going to be raising rents and doing these other things and really looking at your value add strategy. But this is first and foremost one of the first things that we look at as our value add strategy, because it's no money out of pocket. Now, our services, we charge $3 per unit per month, but that service fee actually goes on to the tenant's bill as an admin fee, because now you become your own utility billing service provider. So you have the ability to charge an admin fee. So even though we charge $3, that $3 is on the tenant bill, making our service free for you.
It's
And we
zero.
also give them the ability to increase that service fee from $3 up to $10. So you could increase that to $6 or $7 and make another $3 to $4 or $3 to $5 of additional income per unit per month to pay for things like property management software that's normally a sunk cost for, operating a property. Imagine if you could get an extra $4, what you could pay for that's, administrative expenses that would really help, up that NOI. It's this NOI hacking of every dollar on your NOI makes such a difference when you divide it by your cap rate, really exponentially grows the value of that property. I mean, 36,000 turning into $1 million of increased valuation is crazy. Like, if you're not doing this today, you're definitely missing out of this really, really easy value add strategy.
Yep, absolutely.
Any other questions I can answer?
No,
That was an excellent presentation.
it really was. This was incredible.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me on. We're really excited to help out any way we can with Buy, Rent, and Profit.
Yes, awesome.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Let me, I'm going to stop up. Somebody keeps jumping on here. Carl, did you have any questions? No. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop our record. Okay, well,